Every day, we rise, challenging ourselves to work for what we believe in. At U.S. Border Patrol, protecting our borders is more than a job. It's a calling. Agents answer the call, working together to keep our country and communities safe. If you're ready for a new mission, join U.S. Border Patrol and go beyond. Learn more at cbp.gov/careers.
What if you could have a career where the opportunities are as vast as our nation, where it's not about mission statements, but a shared mission? At U.S. Customs and Border Protection, we go beyond to protect more than borders. From ship to shore, air to ground, cities to local communities, CBP agents and officers are keeping people safe. Join U.S. Customs and Border Protection and go beyond for something far greater than yourself. Learn more at cbp.gov/careers.
Gas mark 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm gonna cook a meal that's gonna make you mine. I'm turning up the oven, now we're ready to roast. When you touch me, honey, you'll love it the most. Come on and put me in a loving stew.
Welcome to another Britflix.com podcast. My name's Stuart Wright, and today's guest is Walter Chaw. Welcome to the show.
Stuart, thank you so much for having me.
We're going to do 3 films that impacted everything in your adult life. But before that, we're going to talk about your book, A Walter Hill Film, Tragedy and Masculinity in the Films of Walter Hill. This has been a few years in the making, I believe.
Yeah, I spent 7 years on this. I was actually finished with an early draft pretty quickly after pitching the project to him. And, wasn't happy with the way that I had structured it. Wasn't happy with a lot of it and began to rewrite. Once I got it in a kind of punching form, that we went through a couple publishers, finally landed with Matt Zoller-Seitz, another film critic, who got it and was very supportive of my idiosyncrasies as a writer. My occasional bouts with divadom and having this panic attack at the end of the day after 7 years. I still wanted to rewrite it again. But it never feels finished, as you know, as a writer, it never feels finished. And if you're given the chance to meddle with it, you will meddle with it forever until somebody finally just says you just have to release it. So there it is. Yeah, it took quite a long time for it to get there, but it feels good to have it out in the wild now.
Now, what blew me away, sort of reading, I must admit, I've only read the first half so far, but certainly in the beginning of it, when you're describing what you're doing and why you're doing it, and giving us some context as to who Walter Hill is before you start going into the films of the screenplays and films of his, is this notion that in Europe, this has already been done. Kind of they wax lyrical, they do retrospectives, but in his home country, he's kind of a bit of a pariah. He wasn't part of the new Hollywood clique that the Scorsese, the Coppola, and it's interesting that that's part of the story, because for me, obviously, as a European, he's been that action filmmaker from the States that we're like, wow, he's really got it,
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be the sad story of the United States. We're to make a broad generality about the United States, we're a ferociously anti-intellectual culture. Especially when it comes to film or mass entertainment. We were very fond of saying it's just a movie or it's just a whatever, and dismissing it as popular entertainment. That's the way we treated our cinema until the French gave the movies back to us with the new wave and said, all these movies that you dumped on us after the war, we think they're amazing. These Hitchcocks and these John Fords and all these programmers that you thought were worthless, and you had us watch it from the rubble. Essentially, we're going to give it back to you as art. We're going to give you a theory about an author, and we're going to do all of this stuff for you. And it took that for us, I think, in the United States to finally begin to take some of this stuff seriously. But Walter Hill still falls into that same kind of ghetto, I think, for a lot of people that those really filmmakers fell into for the first generation of filmgoers in the United States. So this is just sort of negligible stuff. It's a guy movie. It's something you pop in with some popcorn and a beer and you half watch it and you scream at the explosions and but he's a lot more than that, though. I mean, he's one of those guys that even before I knew or was hunting specific directors to track down, I always knew I was watching a Walter Hill film even before I knew what his name was. It was always different. You watch Southern Comfort or Extreme Prejudice or those movies, there's something different going on than maybe the 20 other movies you watched that week from the same video rental store that had guns and had special forces guys teaming up for a bank robbery. You watch all of these movies and there's always going to be something different. Like Bob Aldrich was doing something different. These guys are different, and it's obvious when you watch the movies. Although it's difficult, I think, always to pinpoint it. It takes a special kind of skill, and lacking that, it takes persistence, 7 years of it, to try to pull out exactly what it is that is so unique and tantalizing about this work. What is it that makes each individual one different? And is there a broader storyline that you can pull from a close examination of all of the guys' work, as you would with a great composer or, a great playwright, or, what would you do with a body of work? Can you say there's an arc? Can you say that there's an evolution? Can you say, and that was really the challenge that was presented to me after I watched a few of these movies from my youth that I had always loved but never thought of deeply. Things like The Warriors or Streets of Fire. And I thought, it's so cool. It's so cool. Well, what makes it cool? And then that becomes the inciting question, I guess, to a project like this, to say, what does make it cool? I don't know, because Streets of Fire is impossible to describe and impossible to categorize. And why would a 13-year-old kid like that movie? I have no idea.
I mean, I must admit, you kind of wrestle with that literally on the page, and I find that interesting that there's and it's funny if it plays right into what we're going to do with the 3 films that impact on your life kind of notion, is that films as a memory, and then you as a writer deciding years later to then look for something that maybe wasn't there when you first watched it and was there all the time, or you find it because you're older.
Right. I think that's the mark of any great art, is that it changes as you change, because art is an extant object. It's the same movie that it's not been re-edited for me. It's just that whenever you go, what's that Greek line? It's very pretentious, but you never step in the same river twice. It's this idea that great art grows with you. It gives you wisdom, and you approach it differently each time you return to it, which seems, I think, to a lot of people, hopefully none of your listeners, but maybe a couple, are saying, come on, you're talking about Walter Hill versus Catullus. Yeah, I am, because I think there's something genuinely unusual about watching a movie like Red Heat in 1988 and saying, okay, this is a Arnold Schwarzenegger programmer. It came out after Predator, whatever. It is what it is. It's a buddy movie. And then you watch it again as a, ugly old man like myself, and you say, wait a minute, they love each other. And he's mourning the death of a beautiful partner for back home, and he's coming to a strange place, and he makes a connection with a guy that's maybe performatively masculine, in a very masculine profession, and they make a connection, and they exchange gifts, and they even have a date together at a diner where they talk about lost loves and whether they've ever been loved before. This is Under the Tuscan Sun with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jim Belushi. Something's happening here, and is that something that I'm reading into it, or is that something I'm reading out of the text? And that becomes a challenge, right? Because when you write criticism or write at all, you are always challenged with this idea of, are you just writing an autobiography, or are you actually using the text as some sort of guardrail before saying, this, Paradise Lost reminds me of my aunt's cat. That's not really a valid read. But is there a way that you can pull out something from Red Heat? Can you pull out something from Bullet to the Head and say, okay, so him casting an Asian American lead essentially in Bullet to the Head is of a piece with him casting 5 Asian women speaking their own language and becoming the emotional center of Broken Trail, is of a piece with his empathy with minorities as exhibited in 48 Hours. Is this of a piece with his work? Southern Comfort, another prime example with the actor Franklin Seals, the Rembrandt character from Warriors. Is he progressive, or are his movies progressive? And for me, that's again another kind of death of the author question. I'm sort of rambling, but the thing about Walter Hill that's fascinating to me is that I think you can pull out that because of his training and his background, I would never call him a progressive thinker, a progressive person. He's just an anthropologist. He's almost a documentarian. If he's showing the way that things are, then that becomes, in a way, very progressive. If you're showing, a mixed workplace, if you're showing black cops in Crossroads who are hassling, a black man and a white kid in the South, that has amazing contemporary resonance with what just happened with the young man. It seems like every week you can make this podcast evergreen that's murdered by a group perhaps of black cops. And how does that work? How is that racist or not? Well, the system's broken. And Hilder was talking about this in 1987 in Crossroads. And so, all of this stuff is in his movies, and I don't think he's a progressive thinker. I just think he's a honest documentarian of masculinity. And all of these things come through in his movies in a really brilliant and immediate way. And that's part of the thing I think that we connect with as Americans. We're like, oh man, he makes good old fashioned American, iron and steel and bullets movies. We really appreciate that about him, and we tend not to think deeper.
Yeah, I mean, when you say that, I'm thinking of like with something like Driver, where he makes the police sergeant, the detective, the antagonist. It's not even like that Ryan O'Neal is an anti-hero. It's definitely the policeman is a bad guy, which is a fairly subversive statement to be making in 1976, 77.
Yeah, I mean, he's and as played by Bruce Dern in that movie, he's vile. He's actually gross. I mean, he's just and it is subversive to say that. And the Driver, we were talking a little bit off air about about his screenplays and everything, but the Driver, those characters don't even have names.
No, yeah.
It's the Driver and the detective and the connection and the player, played by Isabella Johnny. He's reduced all of these characters, these noir characters, down into their component function, which is fascinating in a movie about machinery.
When you spend so much time with a subject, as in the person as well as the subjects of his films, you start with a perception of them at the beginning of the process, and then it obviously evolves and metamorphosizes into something else. So, I mean, I often ask this question of documentary filmmakers when they finish making their film. It's like, what to you was the biggest surprise about Walter Hill that you got from him that you couldn't have anticipated at the start of the process?
Well, I knew going in that he had used some classical sources, the Xenophon story for warriors. I knew that he was obviously smart, obviously well read, but I didn't know how much work I would have to do to catch up to him. There was a certain kind of, I don't think it's arrogance necessarily, because I don't think that much of myself, but I didn't think that I would have to read, Borgia. I didn't think I would have to read Edgar Allan Poe's essays about the theories of composition. I didn't believe that I would have to reread the Bible and the Iliad, which I did. It's not a matter of have to, but wanted to, with his work. But once you get into a later work like The Assignment from 2016, there are all of these breadcrumbs that he's left throughout his films that I think are inviting or asking for, not pleading necessarily until, well, maybe pleading by the end, by the last couple of movies, asking for different analysis for him to be taken seriously. He's leaving it in there. So in The Assignment, he's referencing Poe's philosophy of composition, and he references it by name in the pilot episode of a show called Perversions of Science. It was a follow-up to Tales from the Crypt on HBO. It only lasted, I think, one season, but he directed the pilot episode of that, starring Lolita Davidovich and Keith Carradine. And in it, the professor in there is teaching John Keats. He's also teaching the philosophy of composition by Edgar Allan Poe. So this is a piece that was obviously important to him, and that was something that I had never read. I was a huge fan of Poe, but not necessarily of his nonfiction. So I read it, and essentially what the piece is it's a self-dissection of The Raven, Poe's dissection of The Raven, talking about what it is about the poem that works, and the device of the Raven saying nevermore. And he says the reason it works is because there's nothing more melancholy than the death of a beautiful woman. Yes. But there's nothing also more melancholy than a man asking the same question, knowing the answer that he's going to get, but having compulsively asking the same question over and over again. And that became really kind of a Rosetta Stone for me for the rest of his work, to say, is Hill asking the same question over and over in his films, despite knowing what the answer is? And I think he is. And there's that passage that you read about the futility of vengeance and violence. The only end for violent men is a violent end.
Yeah.
There's no, like, even the Ethan Edwards character in The Searchers, or Moses in the Bible, you can get within viewing distance of salvation, but you're not allowed You've created the world, you've created Canaan, you've created Deadwood, you've created civilization, you've made it possible for people to exist in a civilization through all of the awful deeds that you've done. But once you have created that civilization, you are no longer welcome in that civilization. You can't live in that civilization. So, Wild Bill's in the wilderness, and Moses dies, and Ethan Edwards is cast out, and Tom in Streets of Fire can't stay, and all these people have to leave the societies that they have restored. That's the fate of violent men, and I think this is the question he's asking over and over again. And my real surprise was to say, okay, this is a learned man who is not afraid of his scholarship. It appears in all of his work, and none of his work, I think you'll agree, is proselytizing. It's
no.
I'm telling a story and I'm telling you a moral to that. He's not doing any of that. He's leaving the movies to tell the story, and I don't think a lot of people were pulling that thread, if anyone. And I'm not patting myself on the back. I think everyone realizes that Walter Hill is great, but I'm not sure that many people, especially in the United States, ever ask the question of why he's great. Beyond, he's good at shooting action, he's good at, all of these broad statements of good, pleasure, and no really kind of in-depth analysis of like, what kind of archetype is he tapping into? What kind of urge, or even a biological demiurge, is he reacting with or against in his movies that make them pleasurable? And I'm not suggesting that any of it's really conscious. I'm just saying this is who the man is. I mean, if you go to his study, his wall to floor to ceiling bookshelves, every wall covered with them, and quick glance over the titles, as I was sort of perusing, there's Thomas Mann next to Homer, next to Virgil, next to Borgia, next to Poe. It's like this, and I think he's read all of them, and it shows up in Deadwood, the pilot episode for Deadwood, in which his Wild Bill is more eloquent than Wild Bill will ever be again throughout the rest of the several episodes that he's in that show. There's something about his movies that is secretly good for you. It's like covering broccoli and cheese or whatever. There's
it sounds it's what you're saying sounds a lot like, I remember a sort of a quote from Kubrick talking about how he never wanted to be told what to read, write, or watch. It was always for him a discovery, which is about the self, like about the self almost. And it sounds like what you're describing there is because then you can then whatever that translates into in terms of what you create becomes true to you, because you've not been shuffled into a lane, have you? You've never.
Yeah. And there are very few artists that ever get away with telling you things. There are very few artists, I think, that ever do that. I mean, I think Milton did. I think Melville did. But there are very few artists that could just say, "This is what I'm going to talk about." You're making a bad choice to do that. I think a lot of movies that fail today, especially in the horror genre, that are failing, is that you get these people who are not necessarily smarter than you and not necessarily better read than you or more experienced than you, making a movie telling you how it is. Like, I'm going to make a movie about this. Like, yeah, unless you're Herman frickin' Melville, you shouldn't do that. And Hill is a guy who's extraordinarily humble. He's always like, I just always want my movies to speak for themselves. He didn't want to be quoted extensively in the book. The quotes that I do use, there are a couple of things in our conversations, but mostly it's interviews that he's given already. Sort of got around it that way. But he's like he doesn't want to be a bore. He says he doesn't want to be one of those guys at the end who's just examining his own work over and over again. He'd rather be making movies. He'd rather be making the work. And I think he does tell a story though. If you're quiet enough to listen in the middle of Undisputed, an amazing boxing movie, or Last Man Standing, an amazing comic book noir remake of Yojimbo. If you're quiet enough to listen, you begin to hear the story of who this man is. Even his most compelling image, the chest bursting scene, which was the one thing that he liked from Dan O'Bannon's Alien script that he kept. You see chest bursting and chest flayed open throughout his movies. In Southern Comfort, there's a deer very early on that's flayed open the same way. There's, even in Another 48 Hours, which after 7 years is still the only Walter Hill movie that I don't like, where there's a motorcycle chase through a porn theater, and the bad guys jump through the movie screen to a woman who's standing there, bare chested, but the motorcycle jumps through the middle of the chest on the thing, and Hill had asthma as a kid. He stayed home and he read comic books and dreamed of becoming a graphic artist. And all of these things appear. All of these movies become a piece where this is a person who has, not unlike Hitchcock in a lot of ways, made a confessional and written an autobiography over the course of 24 movies or so. He's in there. He's in there for one of his movies.
What, if anything, did Walter push back on at all in terms of what you were thinking you were seeing or understanding about him or his work? That was there any? Where did it get most challenging in terms of when
all of it?
Really,
he hated everything that I had to say. Well, I mean, he's super gracious. He's like maybe the warmest, one of the warmest people I know. He's become a dear friend, and but he flat out would refuse to talk about themes. But there was one time that I said, "Can you talk to me a little bit, just a little bit, about Poe? Tell me about the philosophy of composition, because I'm sort of basing like my thesis kind of around this piece." And he got very quiet and he got really thoughtful. And he said, "You know what? You were the only person who's ever asked me about that." And that was it. That's all that he would participate. But that's enough for me. It's like these little pieces that he would give me along the way to say, well, you've thought more deeply about this than most people ever have. And then we would move on to another conversation. He'd talk about boxing. We'd talk about something. But, there was these little threads in there, these little breadcrumbs that I had to use to sustain myself to know that I was on the right path, because, that was how he would encourage me to go forward. And, mixed in with that are great appreciations and our conversations about Peckinpah, about Aldrich, who he adores, about, these filmmakers, Nicholas Ray, that he feels like we're really doing the work that he would like to continue to do. That gave me clues as well as whether I was getting close to it or falling away from it. The only time I think that he was concerned about how I was approaching a film was with The Long Riders, because he knew from the very beginning that I didn't like The Long Riders. And I do like it. I respect it. But I think his own later work makes the Long Riders not as good. Like Deadwood makes previous Westerns a little bit not as good, I think, all of it. But, and I said, Long Riders, did you ever think that, that it was miscast, that you had the wrong Keach brother, for instance, playing, Wyatt Earp? You have Stacy in there, and then you got James. It's like, that's not right to me. That should be flipped. I think Stacy is the leader of men, and his brother much less so. But he came back after the draft was finished, the final draft, and I had given him a copy, which he hasn't read. He says, he said to me, "I want to explain something to you about Long Riders. That it was intended as a musical piece, not a musical, but a musical piece. That it's like a Beethoven or a sonata, where it has a rise and a fall. And if you look at the actions of a piece of music, that's the action that I was trying to make the movie go along with." And I said, well, if you remember, Walter, James Keach had written this as a musical for the stage, and it became, not a musical, but there's that structure that's built into it. And he's like, I hadn't remembered that. I'm glad that you're going to talk about that. And that was it. I don't think he's disingenuous about his humility. You'll meet a lot of people who say that they're humble, but they're really not. Hill is genuinely humble, and I think he pushed back on the idea of the book at all. He's like, let's just be friends. Let's not like dirty that up with you writing a book about me. I'm not sure I deserve that. I was like, well, hopefully we can be both. But if this means that we can't be friends, then so be it. But I think that really, I've never expressed this to him, but really the reason I wanted to do this, was so worried about it getting published or not, was this idea that I want him to be celebrated within his lifetime for the good work that he did, and he deserves that. I think a lot of these authors will get something like this after they've died, and years have passed, and people are like, wait a minute, he died, and look at these movies he did. I had no idea. I wanted to give people an idea of it before he died. And so,
I mean, one that I'm going to be grateful for, judging by the way you write about it, is his first one. I've not seen Hickey and Boggs.
Oh, man.
So I'm very excited to be getting my head around that one.
That movie is so freaking good, man. So good.
Now, what one last thing about his work, because I remember the first time that, and I guess this is speaks as much about my own film fandom as anything else, is I remember when I read Men, Women and Chainsaws, Carolyn Glover's film about gender in horror. And Southern Comfort is one of the cornerstones of what she refers to as urbanoia. And it was like, for me, and that made me go back to it because I'd not even, it's a VHS I'd played as a kid. And here I am as an adult now reading this academic book, which is now saying, oh no, this is a great example of, putting it alongside Texas Chainsaw, but also more importantly, putting them both alongside Deliverance. And you're like, wow, you've got Deliverance, that there's this film, and then you've got Texas Chainsaw and Southern Comfort being suddenly put together in the same group, which is not a normal conversation. And then and that's kind of, and I think that it's like, I suppose it's a long time to wait, but it's like sneaking. His work has just seeped into the consciousness in many senses.
Yeah, over the course of the 7 years of working on the book, his movies went from largely unavailable on Blu-ray Next Generation to suddenly available.
Every day, we rise, challenging ourselves to work for what we believe in. At U.S. Border Patrol, protecting our borders is more than a job. It's a calling. Agents answer the call, working together to keep our country and communities safe. If you're ready for a new mission, join U.S. Border Patrol and go beyond. Learn more at cbp.gov/careers.
This is the story of the one. As head of maintenance at a concert hall, he knows the show must always go on. That's why he works behind the scenes, ensuring every light is working, the HVAC is humming, and his facility shines. With Grainger's supplies and solutions for every challenge he faces, plus 24/7 customer support, his venue never misses a beat. Call quickgrainger.com or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
What's the easiest choice you can make? Window instead of middle seat? Picking a vendor who sends a great gift basket? Outsourcing business tasks you hate? What about selling with Shopify? Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit a million orders stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try. Go to shopify.com/try now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/try.
No, you could get them on DVD, or you could get I have an Extreme Prejudice from Korea. I have on Blu-ray. I have a Streets of Fire from Germany, Strassen and Flammen. But only in the last several years have Western outlets, if you will, or English-speaking outlets, where his native-speaking outlets, I guess I would call them, begun to release his movies. Now you're getting Imprint from Australia with really box set coming out. I think that I did 3 commentaries for, and then they did the theatrical version of Warriors, which is coming out. And there's all this stuff that's suddenly available that before I was really struggling to find. Especially Extreme Prejudice was really hard to see in the United States, of all places.
Okay.
Last Man Standing was bundled with another Bruce Last Boy Scout, I think. In the United States, it's just really hard to see some of these movies. I think there is, to your point, sort of a slow appreciation, a gradual awakening to how important Walter Hill really is. I mean, how do you make a movie in 1989 with Morgan Freeman and Forrest Whitaker and Mickey Rourke and Ellen Barkin and Lance Henriksen and Elizabeth, and have everybody ignore it?
I know.
What's going on? So. Yeah.
Well, look, congratulations on the book, A Walter Hill Film, Tragedy and Masculinity in the Films of Walter Hill. We are now going to do an exercise in other filmmakers' work, sort of looking at you in particular in 3 films that impacted everything in your adult life. For the listener that's not heard this before, it has a little bit of jeopardy. So I'll announce the film that's been pre-selected by Walter himself. And then we have a clock running for 5 minutes. And when we hear the alarm go off, which will sound something like this, Can you hear that at your end okay, Walter?
I can. It's terrifying.
Good man. And that will signal the end of 5 minutes. It doesn't mean you have to shut up. It's just my passive aggressive way of saying, time's up, let's move on to the next film. It also means that we spend an equal amount of time, give or take, on each of the 5 selections rather than 40 minutes on one and then 60 seconds going, there was 2 other films as well. So does that seem straightforward enough to you?
I'm ready.
Good man. Right then. Well, going 3 down to 1, starting with your number 3 selection, we have Catherine Bigelow's Near Dark from 1987.
Yeah, you'll find that all 3 of my picks were from sort of the same summer, essentially, where I had a really rough year in high school and I actually tried to kill myself. And so the course of recovery, being from a very Chinese background, I didn't get any psychological aftercare. So I started renting the same movies over and over again from the local video store. This was one of the 3 of them. And it was therapy for me for some reason. I never really unpacked it till much later. But Near Dark, Catherine Bigelow's second film after what's it called? The Unloved? Is that what it's called? With Willem Dafoe. But anyway, she directed this movie. She wrote it with Eric Red. This was when she was married, I believe, to James Cameron. So the movie shares a lot of the same cast as Aliens. There's Lance Henriksen, there's Bill Paxton, Jeanette Goldstein is in it. The main characters in it are played by Adrian Pasdar and Jenny Wright. Adrian Pasdar, better known today as the guy who really pissed off Natalie Maine and the Dixie Chicks, so that she wrote an entire album called Gaslighter about him. But anyway, it's about a farm kid, essentially, who falls in love on one of those magical summer nights with a beautiful young woman eating an ice cream cone outside of the local grocery, and courts her. It turns out that she's a vampire and bites him. And before he can become a full vampire, he has to kill someone, and he's not that kind of kid. But it's about nomadic vampires led by Lance Henriksen and Jeanette Goldstein. The scary guy in it is played by Bill Paxton as a character called Severin. There's a centerpiece in it at a remote honky tonk where they kill everybody inside of it. They lock the door and turn up the jukebox and have their way. That is extraordinarily beautiful. The way that it's shot, the way it's set up, the way it's executed and finished. It really spoke to me. It's a gothic horror film, the leather biker jackets and all those things. That's how I was dressing back in high school. And the soundtrack is the first time I heard the Cramps. I bought the John Parr album not long after, with the song Naughty Naughty on it. All of the musical cues with the Tangerine Dream soundtrack especially spoke to me in that really summer of melancholy. And I went back to it, sort of that Freudian repetition compulsion thing where kids want you to read the same story to them over and over again at night. Yeah. This was one of my bedtime stories, and it's kind of soothed me through that summer and the whole next year. It spoke to me about making a family, about finding a family outside of your blood family. You create your own family. It's about those summer nights where the sidewalk is warm underneath you when you sit out with the girl that you like, but you're afraid to hold hands. It's about innocence in a way that's lost, and the way that we try to navigate through our world as it becomes increasingly frightening and absurd even. And it uses, in 87, 88, these movies like Cronenberg's The Fly as well was a huge one for me, that talk about disease and aging in such a beautiful, poetic, metaphorical way. Near Dark is also kind of about addiction and about disease, obviously. And will you still love me? Not only when I'm 64, but if I'm falling apart because of some kind of wasting disease. It's the height of the AIDS epidemic.
It's really interesting, isn't it? How the because you got, Lost Boys is what, 2 years before?
Maybe the year after Lost. I don't remember what year was Lost Boys.
I was thinking 85, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, you're probably right. Yeah.
But just the idea of the contemporaneous vampire being the signifier of society's outsider as well. It's like
and vampirism. I think Lost Boys is the same year as Near Dark. Actually, it's 87.
You might be right. Actually,
they're both the same year. But yeah, vampirism is the ultimate cool thing. You never grow old. You're always beautiful. You get to party all night. You get to sleep all day. I think that was even the tagline for the Lost Boys, right? Like party all night, sleep all day. It's cool to be a vampire. Yeah, but that's been the vampire mythos since for forever, and they're usually immigrants. They're usually mysterious. They have the accent, right? They're homeowners. It's like even
well,
Twilight,
literally, in Bram Stoker, he's sneaking into England.
It's true, right? It's true. So there's something very sexy and romantic for a depressed 16-year-old watching that movie, saying, "Man, there's a way that you can make your own family. There's a way that you can find kind of an eternity in this kind of thing." And it's cool to be out late. It's cool to be out with your friends. It's okay to have a family that's not your family, especially if your family's not necessarily supportive or understanding. You want to find something.
There's our first 5 minutes, sir. How did that feel?
Good. I can ramble for hours, so luckily there's a buzzer to stop me.
Well, look, sandwiched in the middle at number 2, we've got Michael Lehmann's Heathers from 1988.
Yeah, this movie was a kind of a huge thing for me again, defining my sexual object choice. Winona Ryder in a black dress is still my Mount Olympus, I guess. But the language of this movie was really seductive for me. It's written by Daniel Waters, who went on to write Batman Returns, I think the single best Tim Burton film of all time. He wrote Hudson Hawk. He's done some really interesting stuff. But with Heathers, he rewrites language in the pursuit of making a vernacular for his teen kids. He wanted to do slang that wasn't real. He wanted to invent slang so that it would never age, I think. It would always be sort of timeless, almost alien. And in a way, in the years before I read Clockwork Orange or whatever, this was kind of an Anthony Burgess for me, where these teens that I recognize as elements of myself, again, the goth, the depressed Christian Slater guy, the outsider coming to a new place, and finding, through his depression and psychopathy, a home for a while. But the way that they talk, the way that, the fuck me gently with a chainsaw, do you have a brain tumor for breakfast? The way that they talk to each other in this movie, to me, was a revelation. As a kid who grew up loving to read and loving to listen to music and loving to listen to all these things, I had not been exposed at that point to a film that was so plastic in its language. And it's continued to be an inspiration for me whenever I feel like, oh, this is not done, I shouldn't say this. And, I make up words in my writing too. I make up mondegreens that are, these two different ideas pushed together, which is, a kind of freedom in the creative process. If I could be so bold as to call myself a creator sometimes, but it spoke to a freedom in like the John Hughes genre, if you will, of doing something completely different. And, it has a really dark and down ending. It has a really dark theme. It's about essentially two kids that are murdering their popular classmates because they're bad people. And it allowed me to have sort of an outlet for the aggressions that I had for my bullies, for the people in my school that I felt like were the Heathers or the jocks, the ones that were, bonding together and seemed to have these perfect idyllic lives. And even more than that, it began to develop some empathy for me about those people's lives too, because you see these characters like, when the jocks are killed, we go to their funeral and you see the families crying, and they're not able to articulate themselves very well. And the Christian Slater character laughs, but then the Veronica character played by Winona Ryder has a real moment of empathy where she sees the younger sister crying. And for me, I felt like, all right, it's good to humanize your enemies. It's good to understand this in a different way. And so, again, Heathers, like with Near Dark, I would watch them in sequence. I'd watch Near Dark and then I'd put in Heathers. That they both have a similar thrum of the importance of creating your own family, the importance of rooting out the people that aren't productive in your life, not in a Scientology way, but just in a mental health kind of way. Yeah.
I mean, like thinking about what you're just saying there, it's almost like Bret Easton Ellis hijacked a John Hughes film in a way.
Well, it's this, yeah. It's also sort of the ping off of that idea is like it gave me this idea about how you could make satires, how you could make a different animal from something that was very familiar. Because at that time, right, we were all very familiar with Breakfast Club and Pretty in Pink and 16 Candles, and I always felt a little bit outside of that conversation, especially with the really disgusting sort of racism of 16 Candles. And I felt outside of that, when my friends were watching it and really connecting to that. But then along comes Heathers, that is making a hash out of John Hughes. that is saying, all of this stuff is garbage and destructive, and creating the ending of Breakfast Club is appalling. You're going to settle for this guy. What did he do? All of this stuff it's kind of appalling, those messages. But with Heathers, it's like, this is a young woman who says, I'm going to blow up my boyfriend because he's a nut. That's great. That's all actually super extraordinarily progressive. Although I wouldn't have called it at that time, but it did a lot to sort of build and form my perspective for the rest of my life, to say, this is what's possible. This is what you could create. And you don't have to eat what they're serving you. You can season it however you'd like, or you can make your own thing whole cloth. And that's what Heathers feels like to me. It feels like a piece of,
I mean, as a Brit watching John Hughes films and Heathers for that matter, it was always that for watching it for where I am, you've got a big country, you have these sort of suburban sprawl of America where the high school, I'll finish my point, where the high school is the center of the community. Whereas I grew up in a kind of post-industrial town in the north of England where school was just somewhere you went and came back home. It never felt like a focal point at all. Whereas I was being educated through film that in America, you were going to all come out as a town to watch the American football match that there's, and I'm sure that was just an exaggeration out of film. Now I'm an adult looking at it. But as a kid, when I was watching them, I just thought, God, their school is really important and mine isn't. And obviously then Heathers comes along and it's this dark version of like, well, actually, I don't like this thing that is, we've all got to be happy because we're all part of this wonderful thing. I don't fit in. And suddenly you're like, oh my God.
Yeah, I don't think it's an exaggeration at all. I think school in the United States is a huge place that, for development and growth. And it's all about the socialization that we get in high school out here. That's the center of our world for a little while. Quite such a horrible experience for so many of us. Really,
I guess as well. I mean, in England, you can leave at 16, whereas you leave at 18, don't you? In terms of school. So I mean, that's right. You can still be a child and be out of the school system in England.
Nope.
Well, look, that was great. Now this one, I must confess, this is and this is why I love doing this, because there's always films that you've not seen, and then there's the films you've not seen and not heard of. And I must admit, Miracle Mile is one that passed me by completely. So do you want to tell us a bit about why that's so important to you?
Yeah, fascinatingly, Miracle Mile came out of, it was released at the same Sundance Festival as Heathers was. They were both pretty successful films. This was before Sex, Lies, and Videotape made Sundance kind of a marketplace more than a festival. But Miracle Mile is directed by a guy named Steve DeJarnett, who had the script that was floating around for a long time. It was a really hot script. And it had originally had, older protagonists. It was given to Gene Hackman to read. It was given to Paul Newman to read. They both passed on it. So he went back over the course of the years. I think Nicolas Cage was attached at one point. Mickey Rourke was attached at another point. He went back and he did some rewrites, and he kind of modeled it this way. And ultimately, it stars Anthony Edwards and Mare Winningham. And Anthony Edwards post Goose, but pre ER, of course. So it's an end of the world scenario. This guy, he misses his alarm clock doesn't go off, and he misses a late night date with the girl he's just met. And he goes to the diner where she works, and it's really late at night, and it's 4 a.m. And he picks up a phone, the payphone that's ringing outside the diner, and it's a call from a kid in a missile silo saying that, Dad, it happened. We shot our load, and Russia will see it, and we're going to get it back in 70 minutes. And from then on in the movie, it's almost real time, the 70 minutes of him trying to convince others that this is real, that he's convinced that this is real, it's happening, and then going through the whole sort of process of him feeling like maybe it's not happening, maybe it's just a prank, and I just got pulled into this prank, and I'm causing this panic among the people who are up at 4 a.m, including in LA in the 1980s, an all-night workout chain, fitness chain, with all that's involved there. But it's really remarkable, and I think the ending of it is very true to the feeling of the rest of it. There was the Twilight Zone reboot in the 1980s had the recently departed Melinda Dillon stars in an episode of it, in which she finds a locket where she can stop and start time. And the last time she stops time is when she could see a Russian missile, 50 yards in the air about to hit her town. So she can never unfreeze time again. She's just sort of frozen before the nuclear apocalypse. And Miracle Mile really captures the spirit of the 80s, where in the United States during the end of the Cold War, we're very afraid all the time that Russia was going to blow us up, or that Reagan would say something so stupid again that they would go on high alert and Reagan would accidentally blow us up. That was the spirit of the time. It's really a nuclear age. We were scared, really scared. And Miracle Mile captures that, but it also captures this hopeless romanticism of an older guy, 30 or so, who hasn't found the girl of his dreams and thinks that he should have, and finally finds her. And that's the night that Russia launches a nuclear attack at us. And the desperation of that, but also the romance of being part of a larger storyline was really important to me to be able to attach to and begin to dissect, because I think as a suicidal teen, I believe that I was part of a romantic storyline, that, my death would be the emancipation of my loved ones who wouldn't have to deal with me anymore. That would, all of these things that begin to build up, and, Knock at the Cabin seems to be a riff on this, and a dangerous one, I think, a little bit, because there is a romance to the suicidal in a way, to say, like, I am important enough that if I should die, then I will free people, rather than burdening them with a lifetime of grief and guilt. And instead, which is what the reality is. But when I was suicidal, I believed that was the right thing to do. I was the knight that was going to stand up in front of the dragon of my depression, or whatever it was that I represented, I thought, to the world, and free them. And so Miracle Mile, again, has this operatic sense of being connected, the only person who knows the secret of a grand design. And it's only through their sacrifice, his sacrifice of being the Cassandra, I guess, as his entrance, that he can free himself, and he can free others from what's going to happen. And the reality of the film is he can't do any of it. I won't spoil it, whether it's true or not, but at the end of it, it's like all of his efforts are for nothing, really. And his desires and his designs are really a very small piece of a larger puzzle. And that was actually very soothing for me during that summer. And, again, it's another piece that challenges what is acceptable as an ending in American film or any film. It challenges all of these ideas about what art can and should be. And it does it in a way that's, again, another Tangerine Dream soundtrack, one of the great ones. One of the few Tangerine Dream soundtracks that they composed to the movie rather than just have as drop needles.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's the alarm. But there's one question.
Very appropriate alarm for
yeah, it's the DEFCON 1.
Indeed.
But I was going to, one thing I wanted to ask, because you said that this was these are VHSs you're renting from, I guess, your local. What was your local video store? Because 1989 is when Blockbuster comes along, so we're not at 1989 yet. So where were you getting these videos from?
Man, I wish I could remember what it was called. I think it's called Video Village. It was a block and a half away from my house. It was a little strip mall, and it was run by a family, and it just had the usual stuff. It had the curtained room with the naughty films, and then it had the horror section that I was always obsessively walk through so that I could look at the covers from when I was little. But I'd go in, and when they closed a couple of years after this, in the early 90s, after Blockbuster probably, when they closed, they gave me the VHS copy of Miracle Mile, Near Dark, and Heathers.
No way.
As a going away present. I still have them because I'd rented them so much. And I think over the course of the next year after I got out of the mental hospital, they put you in there for 3 days after trying to kill yourself. For the year afterwards, I rented these things over 100 times each, and I've watched each of these films maybe 200 or 300 times. They would just be on as I was doing other things, as homework or whatever.
Yeah.
They'd be on, and that was their going away present when they closed up. But they knew that it meant something, to me clearly. It became my life preserver in a way, in an obsessive and acknowledgedly strange kind of way. But it was my they were the paving stones for the road on my way back, and they were the reason I think I didn't try again.
When I was thinking about this format and asking people to come and talk, I wasn't expecting literally the impact on your life being you're here because of. Well,
I thought a lot about the question, because you can get really precious with the answer. I could say, well, the Coppola's conversation made me a film critic, and it's easy to go back and say, the first time I saw Battleship Potemkin was when I understood that you can get precious about this. But I wanted to be very straightforward with you and say, look, this is if you're asking the question of what's meant the most to me, the films that kind of got me here, these are it. That's
They
literally it.
literally got you
Literally
here.
it. Yeah.
Well, look, I just
Actually wrote a book about Miracle Mile. It's a monograph
okay.
that you can also get, which is about that summer, about the whole process of this going through, but also a sort of a shot by shot analysis of the film.
Well, look, I'll put links in the show notes to that. And do you want to shout out to what other work do you want to shine a light on while I've got you?
Oh, I'm terrible at this. Maybe just the Walter Hill book and the Miracle Mile book are good. Yeah.
And then looking forward, then what's in the near distance? What's your next priority, as it were, that you can share with us?
Well, I've started work on another book that's going to be kind of difficult to complete, I think, because I have to have access to a lot of archives. But I'm excited about it. I don't really feel like I can announce yet what it is, but cool. I did get David Fincher to write the introduction for it, so I'm feeling kind of excited about that. I have this weird legacy of getting really good people to help me with these things, because it's like buying the cheapest house in a really rich neighborhood, where it's like if I'm the one that's like the least important person as a part of a larger project, I feel much better about doing it. That because I don't know that I have any draw personally as a creator and author, but if I can get other people to come in with me, like with the Walter Hill book, we have Elroy and Edgar Wright wrote something for it, and Larry Gross and Ganzier, the great Egyptian artist, did the cover for me. Like all of these people are so much more accomplished and interesting than I am, that if you could give them a chance to help Walter Hill get sort of the knowledge that he needs, then I feel really good about it. So anyway, yeah, it's working on another book, and in the meantime, just doing the stuff that I always have been doing, is writing film reviews and appreciations and things like that, and doing a little bit of teaching here and there. Excellent. Well, look, it just gives me to say thank you very much for giving your time on a Britflix podcast. Stuart, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Every day, we rise, challenging ourselves to work for what we believe in. At U.S. Border Patrol, protecting our borders is more than a job. It's a calling. Agents answer the call, working together to keep our country and communities safe. If you're ready for a new mission, join U.S. Border Patrol and go beyond. Learn more at cbp.gov/careers.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.